In this video, you will get lessons from this #1 bestseller book. I'm offering this lesson to you for free as part of my company's mission to help you reach your music dreams and have fun along the way. You will find the playlist with all videos from this course in the video description and comments. There may be information in previous videos that will make the video you are watching now easier to understand. I recommend watching the videos in order. Hi, I'm Dan Spencer, author of the Best Music Theory book for beginners. Over 5,000 people have purchased this book, pushing it to hit #1 bestseller in its category on Amazon. Now, here is the next lesson and the Best Music Theory course, Level 1. Welcome to Pitch and Notes 1. You've officially graduated from all the rhythm lessons. And from now on, we're going to be talking about pitch, which means how low and how high notes are, not just is there sound and not sound for rhythm. So let's talk about high sounds versus low sounds. So we call most sounds pitches. Pitch is a single sound. If you open your mouth and say just like you would at the doctor's or dentist's office, the sound you're making is a pitch, which you can sometimes call a note. A note is a way of measuring certain pitches and giving them names. More on that later. So let's compare some high pitches and some low pitches. So here is example 31, high pitches. Those sure are high sounding pitches. Sounds kind of like a bird chirping or a door squeaking, or if you've ever had the misfortune of hearing a car brake squeaking as well. Pretty close to that. Okay, let's listen to some low pitches. This is example 32. Okay, now those are lower pitches like thunder rumbling in the distance, or perhaps if you've ever heard someone in their car listening to music very loud and all you hear is the that's the low sound or the bass coming through. So low pitches versus high pitches. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to talk about how sound is made and measured, because now that we're concerned with how low and how high sounds are, not just whether there is sound or silence for rhythm, we're concerned about pitch. We're concerned about, well, how low is the sound? How high is the sound? We're going to talk a little bit about how sound is made and measured. So sound actually happens through waves, and these are called sound waves. So whenever you hear a sound, there's a literal wave of vibration happening that your ear picks up. So for example, if I clap, that creates a vibration that my microphone picks up. My microphone records that through all my software, and now you listening to that in your video hear that clap from your speakers that vibrate these very small, fine bones in your ear, and that's how you actually hear sound. So sound waves vibrate through the air, and then they vibrate the fine bones and membranes in your ear so you can hear sound. Now what's interesting is that higher pitches actually vibrate a lot faster than the lower pitches. And that's how we actually hear a difference between pitch, is how fast or how many times the note is vibrating, for example, every second. So we actually do have a way of measuring how many times notes vibrate per second, and this is called hertz. Now, hertz is a measurement of the speed of the sound vibration. The hertz, it gives a measurement for how many times a note is vibrating, which then tells us if the note is low, which would be a low number, or the note is high, which would be a high number. So higher number of vibrations per second up here, lower number of vibrations per second down there. So high pitches will have a larger number, followed by Hz for hertz, for example, 880 hertz. And then low pitches will have smaller numbers, like 55 hertz. Now, the hertz is not changing the sound, it's that we're actually able to measure the higher sounds have a higher number of hertz or a higher number of vibrations or cycles per second, and that the lower notes have a lower number of vibrations per second. So the way we can think about these vibrations per second is actually a sound cycle because, like we talked about, they are sound waves, and these sound waves literally look like a wave in the ocean. They go up and down like this. So a sound wave goes up and down and up and down, and one up and one down and back to where it started. That is one cycle, and that's what we're measuring when we measure a hertz. So 1 hertz would be 1 cycle per second. Isn't that kind of mind-blowing? 880 times that thing goes wah, 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 super duper fast, and that speed of that vibration is actually what makes that pitch sound higher. I will see you in the next lesson where we talk a little bit more about high pitches and low pitches. In this lesson, we're going to do one more look at high pitches versus low pitches and actually look at some sound wave examples to understand exactly what's going into creating different sounds. So high pitches have more cycles per second, and that creates higher pitches that we talked about last time, like 880 versus 55. So when we have high pitches, we know there's going to be a lot of vibrations, going to be a lot of waves. And what's interesting is we can actually see how loud the sound is going to be by how big the sound waves are. So we can see that right here, we have some pretty big waves. Yeah, they're going up and down. That means it's a loud sound. Whereas over here, we have very small waves. And that's going to be for a quiet sound. We can see that there's still 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, the same number of waves per second, but the size of the waves determines how loud or how quiet the sound is. Let's talk about some low pitches. So low pitches have fewer sound cycles or sound waves per second. And just like the higher pitches, when the waves are larger, the sound is louder, and the waves are smaller, the sound is quieter. So right here, this is a big sound. This is very loud. This is like, watch your ears. Whereas this one right here is a quiet sound, like very different. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to talk about different ways sound is created on different instruments. This doesn't actually have anything to do with music theory, but I think it's really fascinating information, and I think you are going to enjoy it, so we're going to talk about it. So the first type of instrument to talk about is an aerophone. So an aerophone is a type of instrument where sound is produced using air. This would be like an accordion, bagpipes, bassoon, clarinet, for example, a trumpet, a pipe organ, a recorder, anything you blow in or air blows through to make sound. Second type of instrument are chordophones. So with chordophones, sound is produced by plucking or bowing the strings of an instrument. So that'd be like a banjo or a guitar. You have to pluck it. Or, for example, a cello or a violin, where you see players actually play with bows. Interestingly enough, a harpsichord as well is technically a plucked instrument. That's sort of like a piano, whereas a piano, the strings are struck with felted hammers. Harpsichord, the strings are actually plucked, and that's what gives it its very sort of sound. The next type of instrument are electric instruments, which require a source of electricity for the instrument to make the intended sound. Now, why do I say the intended sound? Well, that's because technically you could take an electric instrument, smash it into a wall, and sure enough, it would make a sound. That's just not the sound that was intended to be made with the instrument. So, electric instruments would be like an electric guitar, or a MIDI keyboard, or a sampler, or a theremin. If you don't know what a theremin is, go ahead and check out some YouTube videos of that after this lesson. Or, for example, a turntable when you're listening to music on vinyl, or a DJ is using a turntable to create music and mixes in real time. There are also membranophones. Now, membranophone, let's look at that. It's like membrane. Membrane, it's like a skin. So sound is produced by striking a tightened animal or plastic membrane on the instrument. That's going to be any type of drum. A drum, a djembe, that's going to be your West African style of drum. Tabla, that's your Indian style of drum. Tambourines, yes, tambourines, even though they do have shakers on them, they also have skins that you can hit. Timpani and tom drum. The last type of instrument for us to look at are idiophones. Now, idiophones, sound is produced through rattles, friction, concussion, or plucking. So that's going to be like a cabasa, a cajon, castanets, bring them together, cowbell. I have a fever, and the only thing that can fix it is an idiophone. So striking a cowbell, there you go, concussion. That creates the sound. A cowbell by itself, again, is not going to make the intended sound unless you hit it with something, or perhaps you hit something with the cowbell. Again, going back to our example of smashing an instrument into a wall, if you take a cowbell and smash it into a wall and the wall is durable, the cowbell just might indeed make the intended sound. Perhaps maracas, shaking maracas, or a xylophone, or even a vibraphone, which is like a big xylophone with some electrical components to it sometimes. So these are the different types of instruments and how sound is made. You can look over this list. You can Google all of these instruments. You can go on YouTube, listen to examples of people playing these, and it's quite a learning experience. There's a lot of typical instruments on this list and some that you may have never heard of before. So have fun with that, and I will see you in the next lesson. So far, we have talked about low pitches and high pitches. We've talked about hertz. How fast is the sound vibrating? Faster vibrating sounds create higher pitches, lower and slower vibrating sounds create lower pitches. Now let's talk a little bit about how sound is defined or the quality of the sound. For example, you hear my voice might sound different from your voice even though we say the same words with the same notes. Just the way it sounds, the quality sounds different. So let's talk about the word tone. The word tone can be used interchangeably with pitch. So I can say, oh, that was a nice tone. Play another tone. There you go. That's another tone. Rarely used in the United States, more commonly used perhaps in Europe and the rest of the world outside of the United States. Tone also can mean timbre. Now, timbre is very interesting. Timbre means the quality of a sound. So the quality of a sound is what makes a sound unique from other sounds, or it's the color of the sound. So to understand timbre, we're going to listen to 3 different instruments play the same exact pitches in the same exact order at the same exact speed, but you're going to hear a big difference between those 3 instruments, and that's because of the timbre of the instruments. Here is example 33. We're going to listen to the violin. So the violin's a chordophone. The performer makes sound by bowing the strings or plucking the strings. The violin has strings, and it's sounded with a horsehair bow and has a wooden body. And this is the sound, or the timbre, the quality of the sound that a violin creates. That's the violin. Now, we're going to hear the same exact pitches played in the same exact order at the same exact speed, but this time by a saxophone that is an aerophone instrument, has a vibrating wooden reed. That's how the performer makes sound, is they actually vibrate a reed on top of some metal or some plastic. It's sounded with the performer's own breath and has a metal body. Let's hear how different the quality of that sound is going to be. So different. Same notes. Now let's listen to a piano, which is a chordophone instrument that is sounded by striking strings when a performer presses a key and has a metal and wooden body. Oh, so different. So you can hear that all three instruments sound completely different from each other, even though they're playing the same pitches at the same speed in the same order. The way you can hear the difference between those sounds is the timbre or the quality of how they sound. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we are going to be talking about melody. Melody is a series of pitches that take place over time. Now, many songwriters and composers try to make pleasing melodies. This is where it gets interesting. What you find to be pleasing may be different from what someone else thinks of as pleasing. So melody is subjective, which means everyone can feel differently about a melody, and no one is right or wrong, they just have their opinions. Now, there are ways of structuring melodies and structuring songs in ways that are more systematic and have patterns that are more easily recognizable that most people find pleasing. Now, a lot of the time, pleasing melodies have some pattern that imply that the pitches belong together. There's some sort of pattern that makes sense to us. Now, while it still is subjective, our brains are programmed to recognize patterns and to find comfort in patterns. So while it may be subjective, everyone's opinion, whether a pattern is nice in a melody, most of the time melodies have patterns. And if it doesn't have pattern, you might not like it quite as much because your brain just really likes to find patterns. Now, because we have so much to learn to get you to read, write, and understand music, we're going to talk about how to craft and shape melodies in Theory 3, not in Theory 1, because we have so much more to learn before we even take that first step of putting melodies together. So we're going to listen and watch a couple of examples now of melody. Let's start with example 36. We're actually going to see this picture you're looking at animated with a real melody. Here's example 36. What we heard was a melody. Bum, 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 bum. That is the melody we just heard that is written here for you, not using music notation, but just showing you a melody. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we are going to talk a little bit more about melody and actually listen to two examples of melodies. Let's get rocking and rolling. This is example 37. Okay, so not a lot of repeated patterns in that melody, and you may have found that melody to not be very pleasing. And you may have found that melody to be, well, a little bit all over the place. Let's listen to 38. Huh, that made a little bit more sense, right? There was more pattern there. Okay, so we heard two different melodies there, both of which had a little bit more pattern to them than 37. You may have found the melodies in 38 to be, well, more pleasing because they make more sense, because they have a pattern that you can identify and hear and just make sense to your brain. We're going to listen to one more. We're going to go back to example 34, and we're going to listen to the melody there. Just a little bonus. Now, this melody has a pattern to it. So you could hear that in example 37, there were a couple of patterns, but not a lot of patterns that you could immediately identify. It sounds sort of like a Jackson Pollock painting. There's sort of like paint everywhere. Whereas melody example 2, example 38, and then also we just listened to 34 again, they make more sense. They're more easily found, I think, to be pleasing. Perhaps you feel differently, perhaps you feel the same. But the point here is to see that there's a very big difference between melodies that sort of make sense and have a pattern you can find and you can hear, and melodies that don't have a pattern that you can immediately hang on to. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, finally, we're going to start talking about notes. Now, notes are names that we give to certain pitches. Only some pitches have note names. Now, the story about how we as a human race came up with these names and why we picked just some of the pitches and which pitches we picked to give names is a very long and complicated story going all the way back to ancient China, also ancient Greece, and involves a whole lot of math. So we're not going to talk about that today. We're going to jump straight into what you need to know about notes. We have some note rules. So, number one, notes are written and spoken with letters from the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. That's how we're going to refer to those notes. Now, notes are pitches, and these pitches get a letter name, and the letter name is going to be A, B, C, D, E, F, or G. Now, we assign these letters to different pitches, right? Some pitches we're going to call A, some pitches we're going to call B, some pitches we call C, some pitches we call D, some pitches we're going to call E, some pitches we're going to call F, and some pitches we're going to call G. Now, there is a pattern to how we assign the letters, and the letters repeat themselves over and over again in the pattern. Let's take a look at this pattern in what is called the basic musical alphabet. Now, the basic musical alphabet, as you can see right there up top, is just A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And the basic musical alphabet are the first 7 letters of the regular alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Now, what's interesting about the basic musical alphabet is it actually repeats back to A after G. So instead of going to H, you go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. After G, we go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And these letters, these are note names, a way of giving names to pitches. You can say A, B, C, D, E, F, G as many times as you want in a row. It goes on for infinity. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. It goes on and on and on and on and on, with the notes getting higher and higher and higher. And you also can go G, F, E, D, C, B, A, G, F, E, D, C, B, A, G, F, E, D, C, B, A backwards, with the notes going lower, or the pitches going lower. You also don't need to start on A. You could start on B. You could start on C. For example, I'm going to start on D. D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D. You could start on B. B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. You could start on G. G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, F, G, A, B, C, D, F, G. Start on F. F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F. Like that. I will see you in the next lesson where we're going to explore a little bit more of the basic musical alphabet. In this lesson, we are going to talk more about the basic musical alphabet, and we're going to look at it in 2 ways. The first way is as a circle. Now, the reason why we're looking at it as a circle is because, remember, one of the things about the basic musical alphabet is it goes on and on forever from low to high. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, like that. And it goes backwards from high to low. Lower and lower. Remember, we can start anywhere on the basic music alphabet. We can start on B. B, C, D, E, F, G, go round and round and round. We can go backwards, starting on any letter. Start on G, and we go backwards. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to watch and listen to an example of the basic musical alphabet going from low to high and high to low, so you can hear the pitches go up and down in real time and see which notes are moving and grooving, and see which notes are being played, and see which note names those pitches have. Here is example 39. So starting low, going higher. Counting up the musical alphabet. Now counting down, the pitches are going lower. And lower. Now, we're going to look at two more examples of the basic musical alphabet. This time, instead of imagining it as a circle, we're going to imagine it as a staircase going from low to high, and not necessarily starting on A, because remember, we can start the basic musical alphabet on any letter and go up. We can start on any letter and go down. This is example 40. So low, going up. And see, after G, where do we go to? A. And then the basic musical alphabet starts again. And it would keep on going forever and ever and ever, and we could start even lower than we started there on A. Now let's look at what happens when we descend, when we go down the basic musical alphabet, again thinking about it like a staircase. Here is example 41, descending basic musical alphabet. Starting on C now. Remember, you can start on any letter, or from high to low. You can stop on any letter too. See, this one stops on G? Totally cool to do that too. So basically, the basic musical alphabet is a way of thinking about going from low notes to high notes to low notes, round and round we go. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to bring everything you've learned so far. You've learned about the staff, you learned about whole, half, quarter, dotted half notes, whole, half, and quarter rests. And we're going to start to bring it all together with pitches and notes, and actually look at writing notes on the staff. So there's three things to know before we head in and zoom in and really look at these notes on the staff. The first is that notes are placed on the lines and spaces to indicate different pitches or notes. The first thing to talk about is that notes are placed on the lines and in the spaces of the staff to show different notes. The higher sounding notes are up towards the top of the staff, or up towards the ceiling, and the lower sounding notes are towards the bottom of the staff, down towards the floor. So let's zoom in and take a look. So number one are going to be line notes going from low to high. You can see that down here, this is low, and up here, we're going up, this is high. So we go from low to high, and these are all the notes on the lines. You can see we have a note on line 1, 2, 3, 4, and line 5. Now let's look at line notes going from high to low. So we have line notes starting on line 5 going down to line 1, and up here is high, and down here is low. High to low. Up towards the ceiling is high, up towards the sky is high, down towards the floor is low. Now let's look at some notes written in the spaces of the staff. Written in space 1, 2, 3, and 4. And again, we're going from low up to high. And then in the spaces from high down to low. So you have space 1, 2, 3, 4, space 4, 3, 2, 1. And it always works like this. Whenever you have notes that are higher up on the staff they're always going to be higher than the notes that are below them on the staff. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we are going to be talking about the treble clef or the G clef. We already had a clef, that was the percussion clef. This is a new and different clef. So it's going to take the place of a percussion clef. We're never going to have a percussion and a treble clef. We're just going to have a treble clef. Now, the treble clef shows us that we're using notes, that we're using pitches. We're no longer just concerned about the rhythm. We're really showing that there's going to be a difference between low sounds and high sounds, and we care about the difference between low sounds and high sounds with the treble clef. Now, the treble clef actually also is known as the G clef, and there's an interesting reason why. So, line 2 of the staff, you can see right here, line 2. You can see right here, line 2 of the staff. Anytime a note goes on line 2, the name of that note is always going to be G. Every time. And so because the treble clef curls, see that? It curls around line 2 of the staff. It's showing us where the G note goes, and then we can figure out all the other notes based on where the G note is. So, for example, if this is G, the next note up, think about the basic musical alphabet. What comes after G would be A, then B, then C, then D, like that. But don't worry about that just yet. We'll get to that in the next lesson. Now, interestingly enough, another reason why it's called a G clef is it actually used to look like a capital letter G back in olden times. So, the treble clef shows us that instead of rhythm, we're now talking about notes. We're talking about pitches. Now, we care not just if there's sound or silence, but we care about the pitch of the sound. We care if the sound is high. We care if the sound is low. This is now part of the conversation. And the notes and the lines and spaces, and we're going to talk more about those lines and spaces in the next lesson. I will see you there. In the next 2 lessons, we're going to be breaking down how to know which letter of the basic musical alphabet goes where on the staff, and which line is which, and which space is which. So let's start with a couple ground rules. Anytime any note lands on a line or space of the staff, it will have the same name. So anytime a note lands on line 2, it's always a G, just like from the G clef or the treble clef. Anytime a note lands on space 1, for example, it's always going to be an F. Now, here's where it gets interesting, is that you can have more than one F. For example, you can see that all notes on line 5 are F. Also, all notes in space 1 are also F. We'll get into breaking down the difference between those Fs in the next chapter. For now, just memorize that we have an F that goes in space 1. We also have an F that goes on line 5. So let's take a look at just the notes on the lines. All right, so all the notes that go on line 1 are E. It does not matter if it's a whole note. It does not matter if it is a half note. It does not matter if it is a quarter note. All notes that have a note head on line 1 are always going to be E forever and ever and ever. Always. Likewise, all the note heads that go on line 2 of the staff, all those notes will always be G. Whenever you have a note head on line 3 of the staff, it's always going to be B. Anytime you have note heads on line 4 of the staff, it's always going to be D. Anytime you have note heads on line 5 of the staff, it's always going to be F. Let's talk about the space notes. So whenever we have a note head in space 1, and again, that can be a whole note, that can be a half note. It could also be, that was a messy half note, but that's okay. It could also be a quarter note. It does not matter what type of note. Just as long as the note head is in space 1, always, 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 it is going to be called an F note. Whenever the note heads are in space 2, always, 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 we're going to call those notes A. Anytime a note head is in space 3, always, 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 we're going to call that note C. And anytime a note is in space 4, always, 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 we're going to call that note an E. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to talk about how to remember the notes on the staff. So we just talked about all the line notes. Depending on the line, the note is going to have a different name. But let's talk about some tips and tricks to help us remember the names of the notes. So before we do that, let's just take a look at all the notes on the staff with their letter names. So the note on line 1 is E, the note in space 1 is F, the note on line 2 is G, the note in space 2 is A, the note on line 3 is B, the note in space 3 is C, the note on line 4 is D, the note in space 4 is E, and the note on line 5 is F. We're going from low to high, always. High, close to the ceiling, low, close to the floor. Also interesting to notice that this is the basic musical alphabet, but starting on E. We have E, F, G, and then what do we have? A, B, C, D, E, F. So this is the basic musical alphabet, starting on E and ending on F. Now let's talk about how to remember the names of the notes on the lines. So from lowest to highest, the notes on the lines are E, G, B, D, and F. And to remember the names of the notes on the lines, we're going to say every good beat drops finally. So E for every, G for good, B for beat, D for drops, F for finally. And to remember the names of the notes in the spaces, we're going to say face. And I like to sing a little song that's going to help get this stuck in your brain so you will never ever forget it. You're welcome. There's a face, face in the space. There's a face in the space. Hey, hey, there's a face, face in the space. There's a face, face in the space. All right. So F-A-C-E spells, sure enough, from low to high, face. So if you're ever looking at the staff and you can't remember the names of the notes in the spaces, just say to yourself, F-A-C-E, and count up from space 1 to wherever you're trying to get to, and that'll help you remember the names of the notes. Likewise, if you're trying to figure out the name of a note on the line of the staff and you cannot remember, count up every good beat drops finally. And that way you will be able to remember and recall where the notes go and the names of the notes that land on each line or space of the staff. So to review, when we look at all the notes on the staff, we have the basic musical alphabet starting on E, ending on F. When we look at just the line notes, we have E, G, B, D, F. And to remember just the line notes, we can say every good beat drops finally. And just to make sure you really get it, every good beat drops finally. And then to remember the names of the notes in the space, we say F, A, C, E, face. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to talk about how to write a treble clef. We're going to do this in 2 parts. The first, I'm going to talk you through it and point some things out. And the second, I'm actually going to write it, a couple treble clefs in real time so we can do it together. You can really get a feel and a hang for how to write the treble clefs. So step number 1 is you're going to write a curved line from line 2 to line 3, then back to line 2 of the staff. Step number 2 is you're going to write a curved line from line 2 to line 1, around up to line 3. Step 3 is going to write a backwards S going up above the staff. And line 4, you draw a line straight through the treble clef down to the bottom. So we're going to write a couple treble clefs here together. Let's start by putting our pens or pencils on line 2 of the staff and going line 2 up to line 3, back down to line 2. Then we're going to go from line 2 down to line 1, around up to line 3. Then we're going to write like a sideways backwards S up till we're about, and you can see this, we're about even with the middle right there. And then we go straight down and do a little curly at the end. Let's do that one more time. Line 2 to line 3 to line 2, down to line 1, around to line 3. Weird little S thing to in the middle, down, curl around. Okay, now for real. Okay, not bad. Do a couple more. And again. Line 2, line 3, line 2, line 1, up, around, down, curl. As you can see that these treble clefs all look a little different. That's okay. We're not trying to be engravers. We're just trying to learn some music theory. Get it so your treble clefs look more like this. The problem with this one here, you can see that the curl really needs to happen a little higher up. So doing it more like this would be better. See, that curl happens above the staff. That's what we want to see. We want to make sure that this curl is above the staff, that little loop-de-loop. All right, I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to talk about actually writing your own compositions using notes and pitches. Now, here's the thing. You may not play an instrument. You may not have previous musical training, so you could write it down on a piece of staff paper, sure, but then how do you know how it actually sounds? Well, there's a couple free tools and also cheap tools on the internet that anyone, including you, can use so you can actually hear what those notes sound like without having to play an instrument, and that way you can actually start to make your own melodies using whole, half, quarter notes, dotted half notes, and whole, half, and quarter rests. So definitely check out the description of this video where there's a bunch of links to free and also very affordable notation software that is cloud-based. You don't have to download anything. You just create an account, you log in, and you rock and roll with it. And I hope you have a lot of fun playing around with those. And once you're in with one of those free software programs or the paid ones that don't cost too much money, what you can do is you can actually start doing your homework in there if you want. So you don't have to handwrite anything. I do recommend finishing your workbook handwritten, but you don't have to always handwrite music. It is a lot easier to use a computer to write music because instead of having to write a note head and a stem and make sure the stem's right, you just pick where you want the note head to go, and then the stems and everything else just take care of themselves from the computer. So check out a couple of those links, have some fun, and I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about how to actually go ahead and write your own compositions with a treble clef and actually using notes that are on different places, different lines, and different spaces of the staff. So number one, you're going to set yourself up like you normally would by dividing the line of staff in half and then into quarters, except this time when you go to add your clef and your final bar line, you're going to write a treble clef in front of the time signature instead of a percussion clef, because again, the treble clef shows us that we're using pitches and notes as opposed to just concerned about the rhythm, whether there's sound or silence. And then you can fill in, depending on your time signature, either 3 notes or 4 notes worth of content in each measure, writing out whatever notes you want. I do recommend trying this exercise out both on paper or marking up on your tablet, and also in some of those free or cheap resources from the last lesson so that you can hear the notes and you can hear how the notes go up, how the notes go down, and get a much better feeling for what's actually going on as you are writing your original compositions. And you can also write original compositions for 8 measures. And again, it would be the same thing. You would set up 2 lines of staff, divide with bar lines, add a final bar line at the end, measure 4 gets a single bar line, and you'd put treble clef on line 1 and line 2 and only the time signature on line 1. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about ledger lines. So ledger lines are small lines that go above or below the staff that let us continue the basic musical alphabet of notes above or below the staff. So let's do this. Before we dive in, let's first get a bird's eye view of what's going on here in terms of ledger lines. So we can see that our notes on the staff, starting on E, right on line 1, going up to F on line 5. E, F, G, A, B, C, D, F. Now we can see below the staff, going backwards down the basic musical alphabet, we have E, D, C, B, A, G, F, and E. And then above the staff, we have F, G, A, B, and C. We're going to watch example 44 together so you can hear and see these ledger lines in action before we jump in and break them down. So here's example 44. A lot more notes than just from E to F on the staff. So you can hear that we have lower notes, and now we also have higher notes. So now we're going to check out example 43, where we can see the notes starting on line 5 of the staff going up on ledger lines, and the notes starting on line 1 of the staff going down also on ledger lines. Let's check it out. So as you can see, these ledger lines bring notes below the staff, then the basic musical alphabet continues on the staff, and then up off of the staff again on ledger lines. So if we look at all these notes on ledger lines and on the staff, we start the basic musical alphabet on E, 3 ledger lines below the staff. We end on C, 2 ledger lines above the staff, and we can see that the basic musical alphabet is here. It's alive and well. E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Round and round the basic musical alphabet goes. In the next lesson, we're going to do a deep dive into really memorizing and understanding how and why those ledger lines work the way they do. I'll see you there. In this lesson, we're talking more about ledger lines. We're going to start with the ledger lines above the staff. So here we can see we have very clearly written out here that we have staff line 5, that's G. In the space above the staff, that would be G. On ledger line number 1, we'd have A. In the space above ledger line number 1, we'd have B. And on ledger line number 2, we would have C, and sure enough, we can see that we have F, we have G, we have A, we have B, and then we have C. F, G, A, B, C. And we can see that, sure enough, this is super zoomed in on the ledger lines to make it super clear. We can look up here, and sure enough, A is on 1 ledger line. G is just sitting on line 5. There's no ledger line above it. And then the B note is sitting on ledger line 1, no ledger line above it. And C is sitting on ledger line number 2. Now let's look at the notes under the staff. Starting on line 1 of the staff, we have an E note. Below line 1 of the staff, sitting under line 1 with no ledger line, is a D. Below that we go C. See, we're going backwards down the basic musical alphabet, E, D, C, A, B, G, F, E. And then on ledger line number 1, we have a C note. Below that ledger line, we have a B. Ledger line number 2, we have an A note. Below that ledger line, we have a G. Ledger line number 3, we have an F. Below that, we have an E. So let's look at this connection here. So staff line 1, we have an E. Right below the staff, we have a D. On ledger line number 1, we have a C. Right below ledger line 1, we have a B. On ledger line number 2, we have a A. Below ledger line number 2, we have a G. On ledger line number 3, we have F. And below ledger line number 3, we have a E. So you can see, just like we talked about in the last lesson, that the basic musical alphabet continues on with these ledger lines. And if we look at the order, we're just going backwards down the basic musical alphabet, same as we just broke down vertically, but now vertically and horizontally. So we go E, D, C, B, A, G, F, E. All the way down, we can see that the D is just below line 5. C is on ledger line number 1. B is just below ledger line number 1, A is on ledger line number 2, G is below ledger line number 2, F is on ledger line number 3, and E is below ledger line number 3. I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to talk about how to write notes with ledger lines. There are some interesting rules, especially with stems, that are going to be good to remember for writing notes on ledger lines. So, first of all, typically speaking, ledger lines should be thicker than the staff. However, if you're just using pen or pencil, don't worry about it. Just write the line. If we zoom in, we can see, yeah, sure enough, if we compare that staff line to that ledger line does look a little bit thicker. But again, if you're writing with a pen or a pencil, don't worry about that. Just write a line. You're going to be good to go. We can also see the same thing below the staff. Also, whenever we have a note head that's on a ledger line or above a ledger line or below a ledger line, we should make sure that the ledger line is long enough that it extends on either side of the note head. You can see that there kind of looks like a rotisserie chicken or a rotisserie tofu if you are so inclined. There you go. We can see the same rules of the ledger line being a little thicker and extending on either side of the note head here with half note style open note heads, and then also whole note style open note heads. Whenever you have two notes that are on ledger lines next to each other, the ledger lines will not touch. So we're not actually writing full lines. We're leaving space between the ledger lines. Now you'll see that the vertical space, or basically just the space between the ledger line and the staff, is the same space as the staff line. So if we think about the staff line as being 2 ketchups thick, we can see that also the space between the ledger line and the staff is also 2 ketchups thick, and that's the same as above and below the staff. See, 2 ketchups in every space. As your president, I guarantee we will have 2 ketchups in every space. Okay, notes that have stems, that's going to be your quarter note and your half note, that are on or below one ledger line, the first ledger line. We're still going to keep the same rule of 5 staff spaces for the length of the stem. So keep the stem length the same when you're writing a note on or below one ledger line. Ledger line rule number 5 is that whenever we have a note that is above the staff, that is above the first ledger line, and whenever we have a note that is below the staff, that is below the first ledger line, which you can basically think of that as B, because B happens to be the first note here and here. The first note above a ledger line above the staff is a B, and the first note below the first ledger line below the staff is also a B note. They're both Bs. You can think about from Bs up and from Bs down, you're going to make the stems long enough that they're actually going to meet and touch line 3. So it doesn't matter how many ledger lines. We could have 3 ledger lines and we could write an E note. We could have 3 ledger lines, we can write an E note, and that stem has got to go all the way up to line 3. All the way. Same thing above the staff as below. I will see you in the next lesson. Oh, but it's not over yet. Click here to watch the next video lesson, or up here for the full video playlist.